Hey everyone, and welcome back to Afrodo Reviews, where on this channel I help you decide. Is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Will you let me finish my intro? Well, does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Every video, they get more and more bold. Today's book is Silverwing by Kenneth Oppel. Now, Silverwing was published on October 1st of 1997 by Canadian author Kenneth Oppel, and is the first book of 3 in the Silverwing trilogy. Okay, so technically there is 4 books, but book 0, Darkwing, is a prequel that was published, but does that make Silverwing the first book of the 4 or the second book of the 4? Because Darkwing was published last in the series, whereas Silverwing was published first, but chronologically speaking, Darkwing would come first, and Silverwing would come after. Anyways, Silverwing has won a variety of awards, such as the CLA Book of the Year for Children Award, the 1998, I forgot that year there. The Manitoba Young Reader's Choice Award in 2000, the Hackmatack Children's Choice Award for Fiction in 2000, the Maud Hart Lovelace Award for Grades 3 and 5 in 2002. Honestly, truth be told, I was surprised that this book was published before the Transall Saga, because I honestly would have pegged it as a newer book, whereas the Transall Saga really is indicative of the time period it's from. Also, did you know they made a Silverwing TV series and no one ever told me? I loved this book as a kid. This was one of those books I reread every couple months, like when I was in the elementary, because I loved it that much. And I was just supposed to find out while rereading this book and then doing some research in my late 20s, and even then, only by complete accident, that this thing got an adaptation.
You can't be outside when the sun comes up. The owls will kill you.
Do you have any idea what you've done? You broke the law, oh Shade.
And yes, I am just as curious as to why they made all the characters look like knockoff gargoyles. They basically make them anime protagonists. For reference, our Shade, our main character in the book, that's the bat he's based on. And that's how he looks in the show. Call me crazy, but I think the creators may have took some artistic liberties with our bat characters. I'm just curious why they made him blonde. In any case, here's the report card. And now we move on to the cover. Now, there are several covers for this book of all the varying quality, but ultimately serving the same type of purpose and same design elements, I should say. Personally, I prefer the one I have now. Not merely just for the nostalgic reasoning. It's got our main character Shade, a Silverwing bat soaring over a cityscape. Behind him is our antagonist, Goth, a powerful vampire bat who hounds our main characters through most of the story. The background is of a city, hand-drawn, and a very cozy art style that I can't help but love. It brings to mind something, but I can't put my tongue on why I like it so much, so I hate to say that. I hate to say why. But anyways, and the movements of our characters imply their dynamics pretty well. You have Shade, a much smaller bat flying as fast as he can, while Goth kind of follows him with this grandiose opening of his wings. All in all, I like this cover. It gives you a decent hint of what the book is going to be like, and let's actually talk about that. What is this book about? Now let's get on. Let's get on. For those of you who are curious, I read the back of this book in my TBR released on the 30th. If you want to see how the book presents itself, then please check it out there. But for the sake of this review, the story follows Shade, a runt Silverwing bat, after a foolish bet with a member of his colony to see the sun. Due to an ancient treaty signed by the birds and the beasts of the land, bats have been cast into the night and are forbidden from ever seeing the sun. So Shade has broken a cardinal law of nature. After the owls burn down the home of the female Silverwings where they go to raise their young, the colony attempts to flee to Hibernaculum, their place of hibernation for the winter. Only Shade gets lost in a powerful storm along the way. Because of that, he must find his way back to Hibernaculum on his own, discovering allies all the way, all while evading a powerful vampire bat that would just as readily enslave him as he would eat him, and avoiding the owls and the birds of the sky who are determined to kill him, and have used the excuse of him seeing the sun to declare war on all bats. Perhaps, along the way, he may also find out why the humans keep marking bats with these strange metal bands around their forearms. All very interesting. So, the back of the book is a pretty good summation of what it's about. The only thing that I would argue is that it does give a very false impression of one bat character named Zephyr. Now, I bring this up as this was my thought even as a kid, but both Marina and Goth, the other two main bat characters besides Shade mentioned on there, are in a majority of the book. So obviously you would think that Zephyr is on an equal scale reading this. Only he's not. He's in maybe 2 of the chapters of the book in total, more serving as a spiritual guide than anything. There's also a character named Throb, who is a side character to Goth, but he has more of an impact on the story than Zephyr does, yet he's not mentioned at all. Although in the book in the book he's basically this whiny but powerful killer who has poor impulse control, and I guess in the show they just made him a slavering animal. I'm not even kidding. Like, from what I've seen while skimming the Silverwing TV series, every scene he's in, he's just like Taz. But with that complaint out of the way, let's get full on into the review. And I don't really have that many complaints. Unlike Transall Saga, reading this book didn't serve to show me the book was always lesser than I thought. Okay, sure, it's definitely a lot simpler, but that feels more like a product of me maturing as a reader rather than me just not noticing it at the time. Like with Patterson's works, or the Transall Saga. This is a book that holds up surprisingly well from a nostalgic viewpoint. It's sort of like, I think, if I were to go back to Atticus nowadays. When I first read it in 7th grade, it used a lot of massive and basically 4+ syllable words in it. So, from my point of view, while I could basically understand what was going on, it was using very complex language. Although I think if I were to go back to it and read it now, I would say, okay, this isn't that hard to understand anymore, because I have 20 more years of reading experience under my belt. Okay, 20 years might be an exaggeration, but 10 more years of reading experience. I'll be generous and say that. But with this book, I still loved everything about it. I mentioned that in my DBR, I disagreed with the premise that this is a fantasy book, likening it more to a contemporary fiction, just told from the point of view of bats in our world. And I still kind of stand behind that. But I did note that there was more fantastical elements to this book that I did end up forgetting. Animals are obviously a lot smarter in this book than they are in real life, and we do see some fantastical elements crop up here or there. At one point, Shade is taken to an echo chamber, which is a pretty neat idea that plays off bats having echolocation, with them being that's what they're most famous for, and having their way of sharing their history by speaking it aloud in this specific room. Because the walls are so smooth, the echo bounces forever and allows any bat that comes in to listen to their history from the person who told it.
This room is called the Echo Chamber. It holds all of our colony's history, sung by Silverwings long dead. The walls of the chamber are polished so smoothly, they will echo here forever.
There's also a hint that bats can kind of do sound magic to a degree. They can project images with their sounds if they're astute enough, and are able to discern the false images from the true ones. And at one point it's mentioned that owls, who serve as the overarching antagonists more or less, more on that in a sec, stole fire from humans and have kept it burning eternally in some kind of hidden tree hollow, which they do use to burn down our main character's home in the beginning. That is also one point where a bat tries to turn into a human and seems like he succeeds, but the story leaves it vague on whether or not he actually was turning into a human, or the bats around him were projecting a sonar image that was causing both him and Marina to see a human. But for the most part, it's just a story where bats are in our world. It was definitely interesting to see how they interacted with human culture, with them even having religions based around the fact that we tend to tag bats to keep track of them, to study them for our own knowledge. We see them observe us and our strange customs, but not completely understand what we're doing for the most part, and thus making guesses. For example, the people who are studying Throb and Goth in their enclosure, most of our protagonists believe are trying to save other bats from the evil vampire bats, as we see them make that conclusion after the scientists attempt to recapture the vampire bats. Goth is also a surprisingly intimidating villain by children's book standards. I think part of the reason I enjoyed animal books as a kid is because the authors somehow felt that because they were animals, we could handle it being a little darker than normal, because holy fuck! That comment isn't necessarily aimed at this book, but my next review will explain it a little better. But, so anyways, Goth is a cannibal bat, and we're not just told this. At several points in the story, we see him and Throb eat bats. We get two graphic depictions of him and Throb eating bright-winged bats, which is the same species as our protagonist, Marina. We see him kill several birds and owls. We even see the slaughters of an entire colony of friendly banded bats, and he takes their rings as souvenirs, simply for the sick pleasure of doing so. Throb is also pretty different from Goth. Instead of just being twin terrors of the same scale, as Goth is large but more intelligent and careful, Throb tends to be smaller, but also much more whiny and not much of a forward thinker. Throb's increasing misery also serves to help push Goth along, as Throb being the smaller bat means that he suffers the effects of winter a lot faster than Goth, such as frostbite. And since they're both vampire bats from a warm jungle, they don't know what winter is. And unlike the show, Throb has some intelligence to him. Unlike the show, he does have an intelligence to him. I wouldn't necessarily say he's the wisest bat in the world, but he is more than Taz in bat form. This ultimately does tie back in that I did remember right, though. This book can be shockingly dark at times. For example, the scenes of Throb and Goth eating bats aren't really skimped on. Shade and Marina stumble upon a slaughter of gray-winged bats by the birds, where all that they can find is the wings that are ripped off the bats' bodies and scattered about in the dozens. When Marina and Shade are captured by a squad of pigeons who think they killed a couple pigeons, the pigeons' ultimate punishment for them is to try and tear off their wings, with a scene where the pigeons are sharpening their beaks while all the other ones are chanting, "Tear 'em off, tear 'em off, tear 'em off." They said something else specifically, but I can't remember what exactly. Right? Then there's the Mad Rat King, who actually waterboards them. And honestly, I appreciate the book. I appreciate the book for the fact that it does go so dark at times. When it does this, it doesn't feel like it's talking down to its audience or treating them like babies. This is a book written for kids that respects kids. And because of that, unlike the Transall Saga, I can reread this well outside that target demographic and still enjoy it, even if I wouldn't say it's really up to my standards nowadays. Of the small complaints that I do have, there are a couple. The first is that the characters are kind of flat. Each character more or less ends the same way they started, without much, arcs. Shade remains almost the same, only really changing in his headspace, I guess. Marina goes from wanting to know the mystery behind her band to ultimately giving it up to stay with him and save her friend. Ariel is the kindly mother. The wise elders are wise except for the bad ones who are closed-minded and scared of change. When characters do change, we don't see much of the logic behind the change. Shade, for example, I think one of the arcs he was supposed to be going through is accepting his limitations and letting go of his anger at being runt by relying on his intelligence, which is noted as being much stronger than most other bats. This is clearly meant to be showcased when he tricks Garth into thinking he's converted to the vampire bat's way of thinking, and then drugs him in order for him and Marina to escape during the light of day. But there's no point in the story where he takes a moment and he has his own, and realizes that he has his own advantages of being small but clever over Garth and Throg's powerful but not quite as intelligent nature. It's a lot of telling, not showing. It also does follow a lot of the stuff that's somewhat cliched nowadays. Like, obviously this book was written in 1997, so what was cliched now isn't necessarily cliched back then. Like Garth seemingly being killed only for him to spring to life in the final pages of the book and commit another murder while vowing bloody revenge on our protagonist, much like a slasher villain.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
Shade is a social outcast due to his small size and curious nature, with a doting, if somewhat overbearing mother and an absent father. So on, so forth. But it's really hard to hold it against the book. It's over 27 years old. Obviously, some things are going to seem outdated nowadays. Another thing I do want to point out is I did think it was a little weird that owls are considered the main enforcer of the fact that bats can't see the sun. Of all the choices to choose, that was always the weirdest to me because owls are also nocturnal hunters, at least as far as I know. So when I keep seeing scenes of the owls being the one to enforce that bats can't see the sun, it does come off a little bit hypocritical because owls are also nocturnal. They prefer to stay outside. They prefer to sleep during the day and come out at night to hunt. So in essence, owls would kind of be in the same boat as bats, wouldn't they? In the end, though, I don't think I have much else to say on the book. I'd give it a solid 8 out of 10. Like I said, it's a nostalgic book that's held up pretty well. It's really one of those books that I would recommend that if you're curious, go ahead and look it up. But it is definitely aimed at a younger audience, obviously. So I'm not going to recommend this to my viewer base that's used to reading much more advanced books. I will say that it is interesting enough that if you did want to check it out, you might be able to enjoy it. I can't for sure say how much of this is tinged in bias or not. I personally think that the story itself is still pretty good. The book is still pretty good. It's definitely a lot better than Transall Saga. And that was one of those books that I really loved. So I'm going to hope that I was able to look at this with a lot more of an unbiased viewpoint. But obviously with that comes the question. It's 8 out of 10, guys. Do you really think I'm going to throw it in about 2? I know it's kind of predictable to not even do the whole dramatic pause and thing, but it's an 8 out of 10. I mean, you guys obviously know I'm not going to throw it into Mount Doom, so why play with the suspense, It's a good book. I can recommend it to people. I might even read it again in a year's time just to read it again. Like I said, this is one of those books I've had the longest. So, in any case, with that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones. And don't forget where your adventure started. See you later, everyone.